You're not authorized to be here. Leave the base immediately. I'm just returning equipment. We don't accept military hardware from civilians. Get out. The small woman walked away quietly, carrying a box containing simulation data drives. But less than an hour later, a convoy of military vehicles pulled through the gates. A general stepped out, voice sharp. Where is she? Her name was Hannah Lee, 36 years old, former flight simulation specialist from the Electronic Tactical Development Group. She'd served 11 years before medical discharge due to shoulder injury sustained during an electromagnetic interference simulation mission. She'd written hundreds of hours of algorithms for aerial combat simulation programs, but after leaving the service, her file was categorized as honorary dischargee. That morning, Hannah drove her old pickup truck back to her former base to return a special hard drive she'd discovered while cleaning out her house. It contained forgotten simulation logs from Operation Grey Brick 2014. At the gate, a security lieutenant stopped her. Civilians aren't permitted in the technical area. I don't need to go deep inside. I just need to return this. We're not accepting anything. Please leave the area. She showed her old military ID card. The lieutenant looked at it and laughed dismissively. This is expired. You served here? I've never heard your name. What he didn't know was that Hannah Lee had designed the tactical simulation systems that trained half the pilots currently on active duty. Her algorithms had been used to prepare air crews for missions in Afghanistan, Syria, and classified operations across 3 continents. But to him, she was just another civilian trying to get onto a military installation. Ma'am, I need you to move your vehicle and leave immediately. This is a restricted facility. Hannah didn't argue. She'd learned that arguing with security rarely accomplished anything, but as she walked back to her truck, she felt the weight of the hard drive in the box. Critical simulation data that could be the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. Data that she'd spent months developing, scenarios that could save lives in real combat situations. And now, because she no longer wore a uniform, it was being treated like worthless junk. She sat in her truck for a moment, looking back at the base where she'd spent the most important years of her career, where she'd worked 18-hour days to perfect simulation systems that would keep pilots alive, where she was now considered nobody. The irony wasn't lost on her. The same institution that had once depended on her expertise now refused to let her through the front gate. Comment, so unfair, if you've seen experienced people treated like they don't matter. Hannah drove away quietly. In her truck, she plugged the hard drive into her old laptop to double-check the contents. On screen, undecoded simulation data labeled Black Room, Ghost Scenarios, Simlock 7. She remembered, in 2014, the simulation system had crashed, and a critical mission was canceled at the last minute due to lost tactical data. But she'd secretly created a backup for emergency recovery purposes, then forgotten about it when she transferred to logistics before her discharge. Hannah sent a sample of the log files through personal email to Major Tillman, who'd been her simulation advisor. Almost immediately, Tillman called back, voice shaking. Hannah, where are you right now? General Ridley is conducting a direct inspection. Get back to base, now. Meanwhile, at the base tactical center, the new simulation system was experiencing a major failure. The entire Eagle Red response operation couldn't run because it was missing level 7 data. A technician checked the backup files and discovered a notation. Simlock 7, only one copy exists, written by HL, Ghostline Protocol. The entire room held its breath. HL was Hannah Lee. A senior programmer whispered, "She's the only person who understood Ghostline architecture. Without her code, half our tactical simulations are worthless." The base commander realized the magnitude of the problem. You're telling me we just kicked off the base? The person who wrote the programs we can't run without? Sir, her access was revoked when she was discharged. Standard protocol. Standard protocol just cost us our most critical simulation capabilities. At that moment, General Ridley walked into the command center for his inspection. The first thing he noticed was the dead simulation screens. Why are the tactical displays offline? Sir, we're experiencing a system failure. Missing core simulation files. What files? Ghostline protocols, sir. Level 7 tactical scenarios. General Ridley's face went white. Hannah Lee wrote those. Where is she? Sir, she was here this morning. Security turned her away for not having current authorization. The general's voice rose. She came here? With what? Unknown, sir. She said she was returning equipment. General Ridley realized what had happened. Hannah hadn't just been trying to visit. She'd been trying to return the missing simulation data that could make or break the next critical mission, and they'd turned her away like she was nobody. Get me a phone, now. But Hannah's phone went straight to voicemail. She'd turned it off, probably assuming no one wanted to hear from her. The general looked around the room of technical specialists, all of whom were struggling with systems that Hannah could fix in minutes. Find her, bring her back, and whoever turned her away will be explaining that decision to me personally. Comment, I was wrong if you've ever underestimated someone who'd already moved on. General Ridley's convoy arrived at the base gates. He stepped out without acknowledging anyone's salutes. First words, where is she? The duty officer stammered. A woman named Hannah Lee. She was denied access because she's no longer on active duty. Ridley's voice thundered. She wrote Simlock 7, the response simulation that saved Bravo team in 2014. He immediately ordered the gates reopened and announced over the base intercom, if anyone sees Hannah Lee, escort her back immediately. All access restrictions are lifted. 15 minutes later, Hannah returned. Her old pickup truck stopped at the gate, and this time she was escorted directly to the command center. In the data room, she plugged in the hard drive. The screens lit up. Advanced tactical simulation that could interface directly with the Eagle Red operation needed for next week's real-world mission. General Ridley stood before his entire staff. This woman is the reason our systems still function, and she's the reason we won't lose more people unnecessarily. But Hannah's response surprised everyone. I'm not here for recognition. I just don't want the new people to lack the tools we had to survive, the general continued. Hannah Lee designed the tactical simulation systems that have trained over 3,000 pilots. Her Ghost Line protocols have been used in every major air operation for the past decade. A young technician raised his hand. Ma'am, why did you leave the service if your work was so important? Because sometimes the most important thing you can do is step aside so others can build on what you started. But why bring this back now? Hannah looked around the room. Because I heard through unofficial channels that you were having simulation failures, and I knew I had backup data that might help. General Ridley asked, You've been monitoring our operational status, even after discharge? Not monitoring, just caring. When you spend 11 years of your life building something, you don't stop caring about whether it works. The base commander, who'd been quiet until now, spoke up. Ma'am, would you consider returning to active duty? We clearly need your expertise. Hannah shook her head. I'm more useful as a civilian consultant. I can work on improvements without being constrained by military bureaucracy. What do you mean? I've spent the last 3 years developing enhanced simulation protocols in my garage, scenarios that are more realistic than anything currently in use. But I needed to make sure the basic systems were still functional before offering upgrades. A senior programmer asked, You've been working on military simulations? As a hobby? I've been working on keeping pilots alive. That's not a hobby, that's a responsibility. General Ridley realized the full scope of what had almost been lost. Ma'am, how many other discharge personnel have critical knowledge that we're not accessing? Dozens, maybe hundreds. You discharge people, but you don't discharge their expertise. Most of us would be happy to help. We just need to be asked and respected. The general made an immediate decision. Effective today, we're establishing a civilian consultant program for discharge technical personnel. Hannah, would you head that program? I'll consider it, but first, let me show you what I've been working on. She opened another folder on her laptop, advanced simulation scenarios that made the current systems look primitive. This is what modern tactical simulation should look like. The room fell silent as they watched demonstrations of training scenarios more realistic and comprehensive than anything they'd ever seen. Hannah had spent 3 years working alone, advancing military simulation technology beyond what entire teams had accomplished. Comment, I owe someone if someone's expertise has helped you without you realizing it. Hannah declined all offers to return to active duty. She simply left the hard drive and a handwritten note. If the simulation fails, replace Logic 3 with linear sensor checking. Always the weak point. In the simulation training room, an empty chair bears a small wooden nameplate. Hannah's chair, silent advisor. New technicians study her old code to learn proper programming techniques. A young officer whispered while practicing simulation controls. Without her, we would have failed from step one. Nobody mentioned her name in press briefings, but everyone knew someone had left the military but never left their responsibility. 6 months later, the civilian consultant program Hannah suggested had recruited 47 discharge technical specialists. Former engineers, programmers, tactical analysts, and systems designers who'd been ignored after leaving service. Their combined knowledge revolutionized military training systems across all branches. A year later, pilot survival rates in combat zones improved by 23%. Mission success rates increased by 31%. Equipment failures dropped to historic lows. When reporters asked about the improvements, officials credited enhanced training protocols and advanced simulation technology. They never mentioned that most of the improvements came from people working in their garages, developing solutions for an institution that had forgotten their value. Hannah continued working from her home office, designing simulation scenarios for scenarios the military hadn't even considered yet, preparing for conflicts that might happen in 5 or 10 years. When young programmers visited to learn from her, she always told them the same thing. Your value doesn't disappear when you take off the uniform. Your responsibility to help people survive, that's permanent. Today, military simulation systems around the world use protocols developed by discharged veterans working as unpaid consultants, people who contribute expertise without seeking credit, recognition, or compensation, because they understand something that bureaucracy often forgets. Service doesn't end with discharge, it just changes location. Be like Hannah. Use your expertise to help people, regardless of whether you're officially employed to do so. And when institutions forget your value, show them through results, not arguments. Because the most important work is often done by people who no longer have permission to do it officially. Comment, "I'll live better," if you believe expertise belongs to the people who developed it. Nobody expected the woman kicked off the base to be the person who'd kept the systems alive. Hannah Lee had no rank anymore, no access clearance, no official authority, but intelligence and responsibility never left her. This story isn't just about system failures. It's about forgetting people who left quietly, but left behind the most important things. Next time you see someone who's no longer on the official roster, ask one question before excluding them. Where is she? Because the most valuable knowledge often walks away when we're not paying attention. The most critical systems are often maintained by people we no longer employ, and the most important help comes from people who contribute without being asked. Value experience over employment status. Respect expertise over current authorization. And remember that the people who built something often understand it better than the people currently managing it. Look beyond the uniform. Listen to the discharge. And when someone offers to help, maybe ask why they know so much instead of why they're no longer officially qualified. Comment, "She spoke through action," if this story changed how you see former employees.